looks like we're ready to get started. So we are going to be changing things up a little bit from the way we were working last week. Last week I was basically just going through a book about iOS 10, and I was reading it, and it really didn't work for me. It wasn't that much fun. So I gave it some thought over the weekend, and what I did was I went to the Stack Overflow documentation for iOS. Yeah, and they have a ton of topics which are great about iOS that they're providing quote-unquote documentation for. So, and they're all ranked, right? This is actually what people are looking for and looking to use. And I thought it'd be a great sort of study guide. There's quite a few of them. There's 200 and something topics, and so it's like there's almost 300 topics altogether. So I ran a scraper. I pulled out the topic titles for all of these and added them here to my GitHub repo, Study iOS with Adam Live. And kind of as we go, we're just going to be going through and knocking them out one by one and basically studying them and researching them and doing some code samples. And there you go. This will evolve over time. Excited to hear what everybody has to say as they sort of, let me know and comment on what's working for you and what's not. Let's see here. Okay. So we're going to start with the most basic topic of getting started with iOS, which is probably the hardest step, is knowing how all of this stuff fits together and getting your first Hello World app up and running. So I'm going to have to make some assumptions in this episode. But I think if you were to follow along with some of these basic steps I'm going to do and kind of think through the basic pieces of an iOS app, that you should have a better understanding when we're done here. So let's get started. So the first thing you want to do as a new iOS developer is you're going to get a copy of Xcode. And Xcode is nowadays available on the Mac App Store. Xcode, so you go to the Mac App Store, you just put in Xcode, and it is a first-party app from Apple. So it's going to be the first one here, and you basically just type in Git. It's free. It takes forever to download because it's huge, and then it takes for a while to install, but once you get it set up the first time, then it can sort of auto-update in the background after that. So mine's already set up. I'm running Xcode beta. It's Xcode 9 beta 4 at the moment. But if you're just getting started, just pull the latest one off of the Mac App Store. So when you open up Xcode for the first time, it has a little welcome screen, but mine is dismissed. So you can kind of talk about what Xcode actually is. Xcode is a IDE, okay? IDE stands for Integrated Development Environment, where all the pieces of your app come together via Xcode. It pulls everything together for you and makes things much, much easier for you. Essentially, you would never create an app without this tool, which is Xcode. It's got a lot of handy features, and it is what you work with day in and day out as an iOS developer. You can find out which version you're on. This is a little about thing. So I'm on the beta version of beta 4 of Xcode 9. So when you file new, you get a couple options. You can just create a file, which is not what you want to do when you're just getting started. You want to create a project. This basically creates just a simple single file for you. You can create a playground, and a playground is like a place where you can write test code to practice in. And you can do just sort of Swift code, or you can actually do, new to Xcode 9, you can do maps, games, and single views. So if you want to mess around with like an animation or how to style a view in a certain way, this is now a great way to do it. It used to be a real pain in the butt with Xcode 8. So let's take a quick look at a playground. It's just a simple kind of lightweight thing. People use them as documentation, as ways just to mess around and delete them. Essentially, you can do variable x equals 0, variable y equals 1, then z equals x plus y. And over in the sidebar, you're going to see zero plus 1 is 1, and there you go. You can get more complicated than that. So, but that's not how you create your first actual iOS app. The way we're going to do that is we're going to go back to the File menu, New, and we're going to create a project. And you're presented with a bunch of different project types. The most common one, especially when you're first starting out, is a single view application. You can do games, augmented reality apps, there's all different types of things. But especially when you're learning, you don't want too much code written for you because you want to understand what you're doing under the hood. Next, you give it a name. If you haven't signed up for the Apple Developer Program, which we'll talk about in a little bit, you won't be able to select a team here, but you should be able to keep going and play with your simulator. In order to use the device, to run your app on a device, I'm pretty sure you need an Apple Developer account, which is like $99 a year. You can put in an organization name and then an identifier, which this is called reverse DNS. You can really put in anything, but Apple's best practice is to put in like your website backwards. So if you worked at Walmart, it would be walmart.com, com.walmart. Whatever your project name is, So for me, I always use com.atomontheRun. And then the Xcode will go ahead and generate some unique identifiers for you based on that. You're going to pick your language. You can choose between Objective-C and Swift. We're going to be working with Swift. But at some point, if you're a new developer, you should probably start with Swift because that's where things are headed. But a lot of maintenance jobs and a lot of existing code bases are written in Objective-C, and you're going to be cutting yourself out of opportunities if you don't learn Objective-C. There are two coding languages you can use to make apps. So you can use all of Apple's tools for how to communicate with servers, how to show views in your app, how to animate things. You can use them all, and you can drive them either with Swift or with Objective-C. Swift is Apple's latest and greatest language that they're pushing very strongly for people to use. You can then select a bunch of different options, but for right now, we don't need any of these checkboxes, so we can just leave them unchecked. And then we're going to save it to disk. If you want, you can automatically create a Git repository by checking this. We're not going to do that right now. We're going to keep it as simple as possible. Okay, so you click create, you put it onto your background. Let me make this a little bigger. And here's the first screen you're going to be presented with. So we have a lot of different panels here. You can see that there's this file browser over here, all of these different settings over here, what looks like another file browser over on the right, and then a area down here. And this central area is the main place you are going to be working most of the time and writing your code or designing your interface. The left-hand side here is where you is actually your file manager. And the right-hand panel you're going to be using less. You tend to use this more when you're laying out your interfaces. So it becomes more useful when you're actually working with your visual elements. So usually what I try to do is I try to minimize these panels if I'm not currently working with them. And you do that with these three boxes right here. So don't need the debugger, which is at the bottom there. We don't need this thing on the right-hand side. So that way we can have the maximum amount of area. Now, there are several pieces to even a very, very basic app. So we can run this app right now, and it will have a blank screen, but it will be a working app. And we can choose for up here, these are basically different iPhone and iPad simulators that act as if you have a phone plugged in. And it's great for quickly testing things out. So up on this top bar here, you can run your project, stop your project, pick your simulator. So what we're going to do now is we're going to run our project that it is going to compile and is going to run the most basic iOS app you can possibly have. And as you can see, this simulates the iPhone. It is a blank screen. You can do things like press this button here and go to the home screen, and you can see that it's placed in your dock like it would be on your real phone. And it has a placeholder app icon, which we can press that, we can get back to our app. So let's stop that, and we're going to go and start talking about what are the different pieces of an iOS app. iOS apps in general have a user interface, like a view, and it has a data model. So sure, I'm going to try to avoid fancy terminology, especially in this talk. I want to keep it as simple as possible, because I know when I started iOS development, I was overwhelmed by the amount of terminology that was thrown at me for things that I think I could have understood better if they were explained as simply as possible. And that's not always possible, right? Some of these things are technical concepts and technical terms, and they're required, but not all of them are. So essentially, we have a single app, and our app has a window, and that's our window and our view into the application. And that's this white rectangle right here. The application has something that's called a delegate. And what that means is when something is a delegate of something else, just like in the real world, if I have a lawyer who is my delegate, I can tell that lawyer to go do something on my behalf, and they'll go take care of it for me. So the application has a delegate, which is this file, app delegate, which when the app launches or goes to the background, it tells its delegate, hey delegate, I'm going to launch, or I just launched, or I'm going to go in the background, or I just got this notification. And the delegate will handle those messages. And you can kind of get a hook into them here. So this one method here is the application. So our app did finish launching. So it finished launching for the first time, since it's been sort of hard started with options. We don't want to worry too much about the options right now, but basically you'll use this method in quite a few apps. This is the place when the app first starts and you want to configure things, when you want to configure, actually a lot of things typically get done in did finish launching with app options. But in general, for now, know that this file, app delegate, is the delegate. It's like the lawyer of your entire application. You can tell it, the app tells it to go do things, or it's about to do things. Then we have this thing called a view controller. And the reason I'm deleting a bunch of code is that it's not needed to run. So the reason I like to strip that out is because to me, it's confusing. It's not actually doing anything, and it's kind of there to help get you started. That's great, but it takes a little bit of mental overhead to keep remembering what that thing is doing. So if code isn't needed, especially in these beginner tutorials, I typically strip it out. So we have a view controller. And what a view controller does is it controls the view of your application. And a view controller actually has a view associated with it. And a view is just a rectangle that is visible, can be visible on the screen and knows how to draw itself. It's a red rectangle. It is a picture that goes into your app. You know, a view can be a lot of different things, but it's a visual element of your app. So a view controller controls those views. It knows when they should go on the screen. It knows when they should go off the screen. It manages the animation of them, if they're going to be fading in and out. If another view needs to get put up on top of it, it handles that. So it controls the view. And so I'm just going to go through all the different pieces that are here in our starter project. This is a storyboard. So a storyboard is the same as a storyboard sort of in like art class, or if you're storyboarding with an architect to build a house, you get a large board essentially, and you stick stuff on it and you can tell a story. The story that you tell with Xcode and iOS is typically a story of view controllers. So when you first launch the app, this view controller here will be shown. And you know that because there's this arrow pointing to it. And we're going to open up our side panel over here. And this view controller is our initial view controller. So if you turn it off, you see the arrow goes away, turn it back on, there's the arrow. So a storyboard can have multiple view controllers. And the way you find a view controller is you come over to your side panel here. You can pull another one out. We can adjust the way it looks. We can say, let's go to the view of the view controller. Say we'll make it red. So now we have two view controllers on our storyboard. If we go back, let's launch our simulator again. And we just see the white one with no way to get to the red one. The reason for that is that we haven't enabled any way to navigate between the two. So we will fix that in a minute. So we're going to add a couple things to our first view controller and then have a way to get to our second view controller to make it a little bit more interesting. So in this panel of, these are user interface elements down here. So we're going to look for a label to get us started. Find a label. We're going to drag it onto our initial view controller. We'll place it anywhere we want. Let's run the app one more time. Let's see what happens now. Okay, there we go. So we have a label in our simulator. It looks like it's in the same place as it is in the storyboard over here. And it says the same words that you see here. Okay, so that is a start. At least it's a little bit more interesting looking. And now we're going to add, well, let's just add a couple things to our view controller. Why don't we add a button. And we'll add a segmented control. Text field. These are like these standard user interface elements. A slider. A switch. That should be good for now. Let's just check it out. These are just the kind of stock elements. They're not hooked up to do anything. There's no code written about them yet. But you can see all you have to do is drag and drop them onto this storyboard. And just like that, we have a button that's pressable, a segmented controller that you can go back and forth on, a text box that we can type into the new version, a slider, and a switch. Okay, so those are sort of some of the stock elements, but you can see that our view controller has a bunch of elements on it, and all these elements, these are all different classes, but they're all subclasses. They're all derived from a base class called UI view. And a UI view, like we talked about before, is a rectangle, and it knows how to draw itself. So if we look a little bit more closely, we can see that each one of these elements here, even though it might not look like a rectangle in the simulator, they all have a blue rectangle outlining them to show that those are sort of the boundaries of those elements. And these things know how to draw themselves because we put them on the storyboard and we can see them in the simulator. So that's something, right? So we have a view controller that is controlling a bunch of views. Now, to show the power of the storyboard, we can connect, like this button here, we can tell the app, when you tap this button, I want you to show me the red view controller. And the way I'm going to do this is a little bit jumping ahead, but this is to kind of show you guys the types of things that you can do. I'm going to hold the control button, tap and press on the button control, and then drag it out to the view controller over here. So we'll get this blue line, let go, and then it's going to show us this heads up menu. So which type of action segue do we want to show? And this is all stuff we'll get into eventually. We're going to choose present modally, which is like a pop-up view. All right. So basically, when somebody comes into our app the next time we build it and run it, when they tap the button, we're going to do this modal segue, which is going to pop up the red screen. So then we'll see that there will be two view controllers that we can see from our storyboard. Okay, we tap on some other stuff, nothing happens, but when we tap on our button, the red view controller animates in from the bottom of the screen. And right now we don't have any way to dismiss it, but that's okay. We can just stop it and run it again. Because every time you press the stop button up here, it's like it kills the app and it starts from the very beginning. And since the very beginning of the app is this white view controller with all this stuff in it, that's where it's always going to start from. So if you ever get stuck, you can just press the stop button and then press the play button again to get going again. Now we're going to take a little bit of a step back. We're going to delete this second red view controller. You can the way I did that was in the storyboard, I tapped on it. I selected the yellow circle here. You can also do that over in this document outline, and then just press the delete button. Now, we're going to go through a couple of the options, but I want to explain one thing before we go any further. And that's that this view controller that you see in the storyboard here is a view controller, but it's not just any view controller. To make that a little clearer, we're going to doctor this up a little bit. We're going to say R test view controller. So we had a okay, 1 second. Okay, so our view controller is a subclass of a UI view controller. All right, and that's depending on where you are in your software knowledge, that might make perfect sense, or it might be absolutely baffling to you. So let me back up and explain a little bit what I'm talking about there. There is a class that comes with UIKit. The UIKit is one of the frameworks in iOS. So you have iOS, sort of the big umbrella, and then you have everything user interface related, mostly everything user interface related is included in a library in iOS called UIKit. And you can see in our view controller that we're importing UIKit into our file. And we're using this UI view controller class here. Let's take a look at it. So UI view controller is a class that Apple has built for you, and it is battle tested. It's used in almost every single app that's out there, and you'd have to be a crazy person not to use it. It gives you the ability to do things like we saw before, navigate to another app by very simply dragging from the button to the other view controller. It allows you to hook into its life cycle, like when it's loading up or when it's being destroyed, and take actions. View controller allows you to add other sub-view controllers to it. It's very powerful. So what you do is that you can create a subclass of view controller. And the way you do that in Swift is you say class, and then you give your new view controller subclass a name, and then you say, what are you subclassing? You're subclassing UI view controller. So you're going to take all of the existing goodies you get with UI view controller, and you're going to add your own customization to it. So that's what this code here tells you. And now back in our storyboard, we're going to say that the view controller that it's dragged out here, well, we can actually completely start over. We have an absolutely blank storyboard right now. We're going to go back to our panel. We're going to drag out a view controller. When you initially drag out a view controller, it doesn't necessarily make it the initial view controller. So we want to go ahead and do that, is initial. And let's look at some of the options over here. Really starting with this one here. This is called the Identity Inspector. And right now, this view controller is just a regular UI view controller subclass. It has all the standard functionality, but nothing unique that you've given it. In order to use the values that you've given it, you need to set that here. So this particular one is our test view controller, because that's the name of the class that we gave it over here. Module is something you really don't have to worry about right now. Everything else you can kind of not worry about at the moment on the screen. And what we're going to do now is we're going to kind of prove that you can do custom things by using this view controller subclass. So I'm going to come back over here. Sorry. And we're going to say view did load. Now, view did load, what it means is when the view controller is being created, as the system is creating it, the app itself will, the app itself will create the view controller because we've told it this is the initial one. And when the view controller's view, because the view controller has its own view, it has one view that is the root view, and when that gets loaded, this method here is going to get called. And then we'll get into this later, but just know that in this particular case, you also have to call the superclasses method of viewDidLoad. But for now, don't worry about it. You can just go ahead and copy that. And we're going to say the view, view dot background color equals dot red. And let me explain what's going on in this code. So as your view controller is being loaded, one of the steps in loading the view controller is that the view itself is loaded up. And when that view is loaded up, as soon as that's done, this method is going to get called. You don't have to call it yourself. The system will call it for you. And we're going to say the view, which is just this view controller's view, we're going to set its background color to red. Back to the storyboard. Again, this is our subclass. This is our test view controller. And even though here is the view that I was talking about. So our view controller has this one view called view. And even though it looks white here, when we load it up, there we go. It actually turns out to be red because our test view controller, as soon as it loaded, changed the view's background color. All right, that's very important to understand. If in the storyboard here, we did not have this set to our test view controller, and we delete that, and we run it again, and it's just going to be the generic UI view controller subclass. Let's see what happens. Back to being white because it's just generic. So we're going to do one more thing in our kind of kickoff here. We're going to put in a label, and then we're going to do something that is a little bit more advanced, but you're going to do this all the time when you're developing apps. You don't want this just to be called label, and you might not want to just put a static text in here, right? So what we can do is we can have, hold on, my Roomba is going off. Okay. So we're going to go back to how things were, and we're going to set this back to our test view controller. And let me explain how I got this partition screen. So I'm back on the storyboard. I'm going to hold down the Option key, and I'm going to press on our test view controller. That opens up a second panel, and we can work with the two files now. So what we want to be able to do, the goal here is that rather than just have this static text of label, we want to be able to set that text dynamically in our view controller subclass. So I'm going to, very similar to how we made the segue from the button to the other view controller before, we're going to press down on label, click on label, press Control, and then drag over here. And we're going to create what's called an outlet. So we're going to be able to name it. You can name it anything you want, but the best practice is something descriptive and then the word label. So I'm going to call it test label. And I know if you really are just getting started and this is your first time, there's so much here that I expect your head to be swirling, but you can still follow along with this. And it's best just to dip your toes in and get started. Even if you're just following along sort of rote, that's okay. So we're going to go back to our viewDidLoad method down here. Again, we're going to set the background color of the view to red. And now we want to set something else as that label text. So we can say test label dot text. So we're going to set the text property on the label, and we're going to set that to hello world. And this is called an outlet. This is just a signal to Xcode that we have a connection between our class, our test view controller, the text file, and the visual storyboard file. Because this storyboard file here, this view controller, again, is our test view controller. So we're making a connection between the two so we can sort of talk between the two. Let's go ahead and run that. And there we go. Yeah, that's another thing we can get into, but there we go. So we have our custom label with our custom red background. And it's not the sexiest app ever, and it's nothing you're going to, of course, be able to put on the App Store, but I wanted to get you guys, if you really haven't done anything with iOS development, you haven't done anything with Xcode, I wanted to provide an introduction at least so you can know what the different pieces of the puzzle are. And every day I'm going to be going through the list of different elements, and it probably won't always be at this level. I still have to figure it out, especially if I hear feedback from people about what's helpful and what's not. It might make some more assumptions about what you know and what you don't know. But I don't know. It's still so early in this process that I haven't figured it out yet. So let's just continue a little bit further. So say this was a complete app. You've developed it all in Xcode. You're able to run it on the simulator. If you've joined Apple's developer program, you can run it on your phone. And that might have changed. I think you might actually be able to run things on your phone personally if you haven't joined their program. I'm not sure. But definitely if you want your app to get onto the App Store, you have to join Apple's developer program, which there's no test or anything. You just have to pay $99 a year. And then you're allowed to distribute things on the App Store. So you can put free apps up or paid apps up. But what you would do is, once we've built an app that we're ready and we're proud of, we could choose generic device, and we can archive our app. And archiving our app bundles it up, gets it ready for the App Store. And at some point, we'll do a whole lesson on the App Store. So that makes a compiled file that's ready to upload. And basically you tap here, upload to App Store, you go through some steps, and it will upload to the store for you. So in review, Xcode is the tool that you use all the time as an iOS developer to do everything related to iOS development, as well as tvOS, stuff for the Apple TV, or watchOS, stuff for the Apple Watch. All of those types of apps are built using Xcode. You have your app itself, which has a delegate. We'll go back to single screen just to make it easier. And again, the delegate is by the way, people tend to overuse the delegate. They tend to cram too much stuff in here. You don't want to do that. But at this point if you're really just getting started, it's your first day or your first week, nothing to worry about. It's much more important to understand, because the app delegate's kind of a hard concept, but we can actually put in a break. So a breakpoint is a way you can debug your code. When most people do it is you put in a statement called print, you print something out, and you can set a breakpoint. And when your code hits that breakpoint, it'll freeze for you. So if you want to know if something's actually running or not, or what the value of a variable is, this is what you do. Oh, wait. I got to go back to my simulator. So application did finish launching with options. Let's see when this gets run. This is a good test. Okay. It stopped before the simulator was launched, because the app just finished launching with options. So that's going to print out true in our debugger down here. And it's going to return. So after that, then you're going to see the simulator. Then as soon as this gets fired, then your view controller is going to get fired up. So the application launched, and it told its delegate, its lawyer, its representative, that it had done that, and then you're able to hook in there and do anything you want. In this case, we just printed the word print. Not very helpful. Then we have Storyboards, which is the visual representation of our app, and you can have UI elements. And there's other ways to put UI elements in as well. You can do it in code, but this is certainly the easiest way. And depending on where you lay things out here is where they'll show up in the interface. Now, remember, there are different sizes, right? So there's, we don't need to be doing that anymore. There's iPads and there's iPhones, and there's ways that you can make your design look good for any screen. We're not going to get into that yet, but just to basically show that the storyboard is how you can visually lay things out. And then we have our view controller, where you can essentially customize and override things in the generic UI view controller class, such as your view controller's views, background color. Or you can add your own views, in this case a label, connect it via an outlet, and then set a property on it like it's text. So this is a huge whirlwind. If you're just getting started, I know that it's hard. My recommendations are, as next steps, there are a couple really good resources, which I'm going to link to in my GitHub wiki page, but Big Nerd Ranch's iOS development book and Swift book are both excellent. When I started, I read them several times. I started with the Objective-C version years ago, but I've read the Swift one as well, and it's great. They walk the line between keeping things simple, but not dumbed down to the point where you're not going to become a professional developer if you continue down that track. Like they do walk the line very well. Another one that I like in terms of video courses is a guy named Simon Allardyce, and I think he used to teach at lynda.com. This is where I took his course when I was first getting started, and it was great. But I think he's teaching at Pluralsight now. So I would highly recommend Simon's course if you're into video learning. And honestly, you probably need both, right? You probably need to be hitting the books, and video courses really, really help as well. And then, just the random tutorials you get out there. You just got to get into this world and work at it for a long time. It's certainly not easy. To get to a proficient level of like making a Hello World app, you should be able to do in the first day. Although maybe not. There's lots of places to get confused and frustrated when you're first getting started. You just got to keep going. But to get a professional, well-architected app will probably take you years of study and dedication, right? And it's just a matter of keeping at it. So please let me know what you thought of the format today. Subscribe on Twitch and on YouTube. Be in touch. I'm at Adam on the Run on Twitter, and I'd love to hear back from you. And I'm going to be doing this every day with a bunch of different topics. Okay, thank you.